You're listening to the Crowdfunding Nerds Podcast, a podcast that will help you succeed before, during, and after your crowdfunding event. And now, here is your host, Andrew Lowen.
Welcome to Crowdfunding Nerds, everybody. I am your most esteemed host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined, as always, by Sexy Irish Rick and Sexy Irish Sean. Rick, you're sexy and Irish today. Yes.
For once, someone has called me sexy. That's great. I think you're the first.
Yeah, you're Sexy Irish Rick today. So on this week's episode, Sean and I had a really interesting experience with a marketer that plays at a much higher level. This guy serves as the chief marketing officer for companies, or has served for companies such as Paramount, Ford, and other large players. They work with agencies and everything like that. And Sean and I actually had the opportunity to talk to this person, and earlier this week. And they are not on our podcast. So it's kind of like Tenacious D, the greatest song in the world. It's not the greatest song. It's just a tribute. So this is what we learned from that conversation. Sean and I felt
we couldn't remember what we learned.
We couldn't remember the greatest song.
So
in the world.
are we like a tribute podcast?
This is a tribute.
We're not quite the real thing. We just pretend.
Yeah, actually, we have a follow-up meeting scheduled with this person, and I'd really love to bring him onto this podcast because some of the functional things that they said for, how to run a great Facebook ads campaign, how to properly target and kind of break down who your target market is, things like that were really enlightening. And one thing I was pleased with was that they said we weren't actually doing too bad a job.
I know
in a lot of areas. That was cool.
Yeah.
So, but in other areas, man, we kind of got our proverbial butts kicked, right?
So he's probably just being polite. You guys didn't do too bad. You were
well, he actually was looking at us.
Let me show you how to really do it.
Yeah. So, the original impetus for the call was that we're having so it's a non-Kickstarter, non-board game client that we were kind of having a tough time with, to be honest, getting them results. And we had tried a couple of different tactics, and it's an e-commerce business with a particular product, and
they have a very successful Amazon e-commerce, so we know that the product is valuable and people respond to it well. So it was a bit of a mystery to us, or concern of why we couldn't get these ads to become profitable.
Right. And we could get a good cost per click. We could get a solid click-through rate. We could get, good metrics, except the only metric that wasn't great was purchases. We just couldn't make it profitable. And so our client had a friend that went to his church and was, and came in, and it ended up being this really, really educated, high-powered marketing executive. And the call was actually to determine if we were doing what we needed to be doing, or if the client needed to go find another marketing agency and that kind of thing. The conclusion of the call was that, hey, these guys are doing well, and continue to give them a shot with these changes. And so we want to talk about that with you guys because we learned a lot, and it was awesome.
And it was nice because it was coming from a third party, right? This wasn't Facebook telling us this is how you optimize ads, because when the people who are directly benefiting from the advice, you kind of take it with a grain of salt. You're saying, is this really good advice, or is this just advice that's going to, help their business? Whilst we knew we could trust this information because it was really a favor through a friend or a connection of someone who was working on, much larger accounts than we're working on. So that was it was helpful to understand that this is information we could trust.
Right. And in addition to that, one of the tough things about Facebook ads, or really any kind of digital marketing, is that there are so many so-called experts, and I'm totally using air quotes when I say the word experts, out there that want you to buy their course for $1,000 or whatever it is, $100, $500, and they promise epic results. They promise that they have the right way, that if only you learn from them, you would be you would make so much more money. And that's oftentimes far from the truth. Most of the time, those courses will teach you some basics and then will take your money, of course, but not really be that thing that is going to bring you to the next level as far as your marketing skill set. So as a marketing agency, I'm always careful about things like that. Found some great courses for SEO marketing in the past that have really leveled our skill set up. If anybody listening to this Cares. One is SEO That Works by Brian Dean. That is one that I highly recommend. Beyond that, there's really nothing as far as Facebook ads that I had previous to this conversation that I really trusted. So a lot of the work that we had done, I've worked in, with Facebook ads for like the last 5 years or more. A lot of that has been School of Hard Knocks mixed with the school of paid advertising, awesome paid advertising courses and education for Google ads. And now and of course, just a general understanding of marketing and how advertising works and how the customer thinks and that kind of thing, that has, of course, played a major factor into how, so, what we, the success that we gain with Facebook ads. But it really is tough. There are so many courses out there that are such garbage for Facebook ads, or that are just basic, that don't teach you that kind of next level, and to be honest, there really isn't a massive demand for going deeper, because the market is all there, a bunch of noobs trying to learn Facebook ads. They're not ready to learn how to, improve click-through rate and why that metric matters. They just need to know how to build an ad.
And I think as well, the people who are operating at those high levels where they're doing ads for these huge corporations, they're not going to share their secrets too quickly with people either. So that's something to think about as well, because
Right.
I suppose if they've got a monopoly on information, well then why would they create competitors? you know, so there's that as well to
That's
think about.
true. It's a real the air is real thin up at the top. We kind of have a loose bulleted list of topics to kind of help guide our conversation so that we can help you guys with what we learned. But the first one is, I think, one of the most important lessons in all of marketing. If you want to be a good digital marketer, you have to be humble. So we learned a lesson in humility this week, and I think, I'm happy to say that I don't know if this is hubristic or what, but we were humble enough to receive it, which was one of the most important things. That's why we
Doesn't
spent
sound very humble,
hours.
Andrew.
I know, but honestly, if we weren't, this guy would not have spent the time that he did with us, right? He spent like 2 hours with us on the phone or on a Zoom chat to just pour into us because we wanted to learn. We weren't there to be like, oh no, we know what we're doing. We're expert marketers and this and that. But we just simply wanted to absorb his knowledge. It's like, I just want to absorb this information because it's so rare. I mean, it's worth $1,000 an hour or more, right? And so the more that, I mean, this guy he poured into us, and I don't think he'd have done that if we weren't willing to listen.
Yeah, no, I was very skeptical going in, because as soon as someone says, "Oh, I know of a guy who's runs a digital marketing agency and he wants to sit down and chat to see how we can improve things," like, yeah, sure, come on board, but he's probably going to tell us things we already know or things we've already tried. Is he really an expert? So that's what I was sort of expecting. But yeah, I was blown away by the information we received and was really happy to be on the call. Yeah, it was definitely lesson in humility. We've spoken about this before in other podcasts, and your business, even going to Kickstarter, you have to love learning. You got to be willing to learn new skills, to develop and adapt and push forward. And you have to be humble to do that,
Right.
because if you think you know it all, then that's going to be a barrier to learning.
Absolutely. And in addition to just trying to learn this giant, which is digital marketing, there was another situation this week that happened. We actually had one of our accounts they didn't fund, right? They didn't end up funding this week. And it was like, I mean, they had a ton of leads, a ton of emails, and then all of a sudden they launched, and just to crickets compared to what I thought they were going to do. It was sad, of course. Nobody wants to launch their game and then not fund, especially when they worked really hard to try to fund the first day. And part of humility, is accepting, number one, the possibility that you may not fund. And
And
then what is rewarding from humility is when you actually get to ask your backers, ask the others that didn't back, why. Part of what we do in marketing, we create community, some sort of community. Most often nowadays it's a Facebook community, sometimes a community on Discord, but a community nonetheless surrounding your individual game. And if, let's say, you go to Kickstarter and you did not fund, you can actually go back to the community and ask, hey guys, I know there are several hundred of you here and we had 25 or 50 backers. Just wondering, what was the reason that you guys decided not to back, or what was something that gave you pause? Those types of questions will really, really help you if backers answer those, or if people who are prospective backers that chose not to back answer that. I mean, you could go back and to the drawing board. Maybe it's something related to the graphic design. Maybe it's something related to shipping or some other hygiene factor. You can ask, you can get legitimate answers instead of trying to go to the drawing board and figure out, well, what do we think was wrong? You get to hear from people that chose not to back your game for one reason or another. You get to hear the reason. It's a humbling experience, but it's definitely going to benefit you. You can become an expert in Facebook ads in 3 months, and then if you stop working in Facebook ads and come back 3 months later, you're not going to know what's going on. It's just one of those things. You have to love learning.
One of the things that we learned was that you really need to define your campaign, and this really comes down to your goals overall, even to Kickstarter. How much are you willing to invest to get a said result? So, for example, we have our own benchmarks for Kickstarter, but in order to determine success, people need to be able to agree with that. So, our benchmark for a lead is $2 to $4. That's what we like to see for a lead. We can obviously want to get that as low as possible, but in that range is okay. Things are okay.
We might be able to improve on numbers, but yeah, this is like an acceptable starting range.
So you need to define those things and then set benchmarks. Okay, so this is within budgets that people have, and then focus on the brand messaging. And we sort of knew this all, but really being very clear on those benchmarks, and maybe that's more applicable to things which aren't going to Kickstarter, because it is slightly a different ball game than like going to like an e-commerce store and trying to get sales directly. Um, you know, it is a slightly different strategy in marketing. So that's really important. Defining the goals of your campaign before jumping in. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? And this comes down to you going to Kickstarter as well. What are you trying to achieve with your Kickstarter? What are you trying to achieve with your marketing in your Kickstarter? And to basically crunch some numbers so that, okay, I'm satisfied with these numbers. And unfortunately, you'll only really know the true success of your marketing after your Kickstarter. All that work is worth doing moving forward. You'll have a better idea on your second Kickstarter, your third, or your fourth, if you're able to compile all this information moving forward.
Now, you mentioned benchmarks. What kind of benchmarks should our listeners be looking for or setting when they do their Kickstarter campaign?
One thing that's nice about working in the, board game space for Kickstarter is that, after doing 30 or more campaigns specifically for board game Kickstarters, there really are a lot of lessons that kind of are applicable across the board, just because, we're targeting similar markets, people who are interested in board games and Kickstarter, and the things that they care about tend to be universal, just because, one game versus another, you might get one type of person over another, and then the individual brand, the messaging might change, but the benchmarks are oftentimes the same or quite similar. So one of the big ones, as Sean mentioned, the cost per result, the cost per acquisition, CPA, sometimes people will call it that. The result that you want, let's say for a pre-campaign Kickstarter or marketing strategy, you want to emails. That's exactly what you should be going after. Emails of people that are very interested in learning more about your project. The benchmark for that, for us, like I said, $2 to $4 per email. These people would be people that were interested in Kickstarter and board games, and maybe some other interest. But you could definitely lower that very quickly if you removed Kickstarter as an interest, because Kickstarter and board games, there's let's say like 4 million people. It's like 3.8 million people that are interested in those two things, and both of those things. But if you just simply eliminated Kickstarter, you'd go from 3.8 million in the US to whatever it is, 40 million. And that is going to, I mean, just because there are more people that you're going to be marketing to, your cost per lead is going to go down. But the problem is that if you eliminate Kickstarter as an interest, you're asking them to go to Kickstarter to pay you money eventually. Your actual value per lead is going to go down too, which is a bad thing. So we always play within constraints of Kickstarter and board games of some kind in an audience, and that's why we look for that $2 to $4 benchmark. We are getting leads as low as, under 50 cents for certain campaigns. I think Distilled right now by Dave Beck is just crushing it on, with Facebook ads. And it's just a game that really resonates with the communities that we are targeting. It's got a lot going for it. In general, that's a great number to look for. Now, your cost per click is another. Ideally, you want to be 20 cents per less, or 20 cents or less. I find it acceptable to be in between 20 and 40 cents per click. But if you had a campaign that was generating a click at 40 cents, or the same campaign with the same amount of money invested at 20 cents, you are literally going to get twice as many clicks, and your budget is going to be theoretically twice as effective if if you had a cost per click of 20 cents. So I find that the best cost per clicks are just slightly under 20 cents. I know that I've had cost per click at 1 cent and 3 cents before, but generally it's not possible in Kickstarter. I think the lowest cost I've ever had for a Kickstarter ad was like 7 cents a click. And that was for a brand, a game that people know. It was Ascension Tactics. As far as your benchmark budget, like the amount of money that you should expect to pay to Facebook ads, I would say at least $20 a day. You need to plan on $20 a day as a starting point. Benchmark click-through rate is anywhere from 2 to 5%. If you have a 5% click-through rate, that means that your thing is a whole lot more interesting than if it was at 1%, right? You've got many more people, a much higher percentage of people that actually see your ad are clicking through, and that is going to show, during Kickstarter, a lot of the time with Facebook ads, you're not able to see how many people are actually backing the game as a result of your Kickstarter ad, but you can see how many people the ad is resonating with that click-through rate percentage. So anything else you can think of, Sean?
Another metric to look at when it comes to benchmarks is your CPM, which is basically cost per thousand impressions. The M stand is the Roman numeral for thousand.
Yeah,
milli. So cost per thousand impressions. Obviously, you want to get that as low as possible, because if that is low, it means that your ad is at a right target audience, or it's telling you that the target audience that you're trying to reach is too competitive, and it's going to basically drive up all your other metrics. Because if you have to pay more to impress the ad, well, then it's going to take more to get the ad clicked. If it gets more to get the ad clicked, it's going to increase your cost per lead. So the CPM was something that we weren't really paying too much attention to, but after this talk with Johnson, we certainly will be looking at that far greater depth, because it really helps us understand if our target audience is a good fit for this ad.
absolutely. Now, one other element, we talk about the brand messaging a little bit, but with a campaign, you really have two critical elements that we're kind of able to take for granted a little bit in the board game space, because we're all board gamers. We kind of intrinsically know what board gamers like, and because we know what we like, we have different tastes among I'm a huge fan of dungeon crawlers and that kind of thing. I know, Rick, you love Euro games like Scythe, and
I like co-op games.
there you go. So we have a leg up in that, in that area. But so was a huge deal that Johnson was sharing with us about how the top agencies in the world start with their customers. They focus, number one, on the customer avatar, who that person is, the age of the person, the cares of that person, and what they like, and that sort of thing. And really they even name the person. They give them a name. This is
Tony.
I was going to say Karen, but I don't know why that name came first. So this is Karen, and she's 25, and she has one child, and that's 2 years old or younger, and they go to mommy and me groups, and maybe they're a stay-at-home mom, or something like that. Like, these are things that you need to figure out who your particular customer avatar is. Rick, and he's in his mid-30s, and he's got a brand new girlfriend, and they are pretty serious, and they like co-op games together. So that's something that is really, really important to dial in first. Then the second thing is the campaign goal. When I say budget, I'm in particular talking about, okay, my game is going to cost, let's just say I'm going to, for Deliverance, a legit example, it'll be $89 for the deluxe edition. And I will generate, in theory, about 4.7 times what I pay for it in China, landed cost. And then in addition to that, obviously all the stretch goals and things like that, will probably cut my margin thin and everything. How much am I willing to pay for a lead? Right? So if it's $89, let's say, to get the game and for the molds and everything like that, let's just say I'm going to make in the end a margin of about 50%. The graphic design, of course, that's a huge, the illustration and graphic design, that is crazy expensive. So let's say we make, $40 or $50 per game after, at the end of the day. Then I am able to say, okay, based on the amount of, which is probably much too high compared, or considering all the design that is, all the illustration work and graphic design that's gone into the game. But so let's just keep it simple and say, okay, $50, right? And out of that $50, I have to pay for whatever it is in marketing and still be profitable. So in theory, if that were the case, I would be able to pay, up to $49.99 and to Facebook ads, as long as I got a backer for every roughly $50, we're breaking even. And then if I got a backer for $40, I'm making $10 every time somebody backs my game via Facebook ads. So what I would say, if I was a customer, I would say, okay, my cost of goods sold and everything is about $40, and my margin is about $50. So I need customers for $50 or less. And then, the marketing company, we would try to acquire customers we would try to get to break even. In the first month, it might not be break even. If it's an e-commerce product, we need to learn and figure out what works, right? And then we get to the break even point, and then we get to the point of profitability, and then we get to the point of maximizing profitability. But we need to know those numbers in order to really do a good job in the ads.
So one thing that we learned from Johnson, this Facebook master, was at the beginning of a campaign, to avail of dynamic ads. We'd always be very apprehensive of dynamic ads, simply because in our mind is getting an AI to do any type of, A/B testing without your intervention might be a bad use of budget, especially when we're dealing with usually first-time creators who have very limited budgets. We want to make their ad spend go as far as possible. So we were always very skeptical of dynamic ads, but he really sold us on dynamic ads. He told us why you should use them, how you should use them, the amount of budget you should throw into them, and basically what the purpose of them are. And essentially, it's basically the starting point of your ads. It's really to get a feel for demographics. So you would have dynamic ads for different demographics, and within these dynamic ads, you would hand Facebook a bunch of headlines, a bunch of primary text, which is the text above the image. You'd put a bunch of images and videos into this bag, and Facebook would do all this automation A/B testing, and then spit out which one is producing the best results. So he showed us how we can customize Facebook in order to see the results by looking at the click-through rate, the cost per impression, and the cost per click. So yeah, the click-through rate, the cost per click, and the cost per impression, to work out which ad in the dynamic ad is working the best. So we find the best headline, we find the best image or video, and we find the best primary text, and we create a new campaign with the same audience, and we put that single ad into that new campaign. And then we can obviously we know that's a good ad, it's working, it's resonating with the campaign, and we basically you rinse and repeat that process until you've got these really powerful ads that you can then up your ad spend on.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually ran a test immediately. I was excited to apply this information, and so I went ahead and just gave it a go with Deliverance. And so I created a dynamic ad with 5 separate primary text. So I focused on different features in the primary text. I kept 4 of them pretty short, and one I just decided I'm gonna make it really long. So it was like introducing Deliverance, a tactical combat adventure board game, blah blah blah. And the features, I listed like 8 features that it was like a wall of text. And that, crazy enough, that ended up being my best performer with several groups. I divided groups based on like general board gamers in the US, general board gamers in the UK, and then I did another ad set, which, or another campaign set, which I called Christian Nerds. So, I've got, one audience at about 800,000 people, and they resonated with a certain primary text and headline. And the reason I knew that was because if I were to look at the click-through rate and the cost per impression and the cost per click, I would see, number one, that the dynamic ad would have an average click-through rate of like 2.6%. And then one of those headlines average click-through rate might have been 3.1%. So I know that the one headline that had the highest click-through rate was actually outperforming the average. So if I simply just made it so that was the only headline, the ad would immediately perform better. In addition to that, in the same test with the single dynamic ad, I had different, of course, primary text and headline. I was able to do that with both of them. And so, I ended up going from, I guess it was like the average click-through rate was 3.44% with my dynamic ad, which is pretty high in this highly targeted group. It went up to 3.96 after, which is basically more people clicking. It's going to cost me less per click, and it ended up performing a whole lot better. It was a really nice. I spent a total of like $37 on that dynamic ad, and I was able to make a meaningful decision. Normally what we do is we tell people that, hey, you need to spend about $60 in order to have enough data to make meaningful decisions. So oftentimes with an with an account that has a budget of $20 a day, we'll make changes every 3 days. That was from the gut. And then this guy Johnson, he said to us that, hey, you need to make changes every 2 days. You'll have enough information after 2 days with a dynamic ad. And I found that to be exactly right. It was a very cool thing to see. My cost per result per website subscriber with a dynamic ad was $2.20. And with after my test was completed, I went and I created just the image with the ad with the winning headline, with the winning primary text, with the best click-through rates and whatnot. And my cost per website subscriber dropped from $2.20 to $1.35. It was very cool.
Wow.
Is this why I keep seeing those Deliverance ads on my Facebook feed now? Seen quite a few.
Yeah, I think
I do have one thing to add. It's a little bit outside of Facebook. I know we're talking about Facebook, but don't just limit yourself to dynamic ads on Facebook. Your whole entire process should be dynamic. You got your dynamic ad on Facebook. You're tuning it. You're doing your split testing. Now, once they click on your ad, they go to your landing page. Well, guess what? You could do the same thing with your landing page. But depending on what kind of platform you're using, most platforms support A/B split testing. So, like for example, if you're using a WordPress landing page, there's a couple plugins that will do split testing, so you can tweak out like your header, your hero text, image, etc. And then also like things like ClickFunnels has A/B split testing. I believe Wix does too. So there's really some great tools out there that you can use to actually take that and keep going with it to fine tune your ad and get the most out of your investment.
definitely. Now, one other question that was asked in our meeting was, would you buy this based on that ad? And I think that that's a great question to pose to you guys as just our listeners. Whenever you're creating an ad or whenever you are just looking at an ad, use the opportunity to educate yourself a little bit. If it's something that, is within your area of interest, a lot of people listen to this love board games and are board game publishers and Kickstarter hopefuls. Would you buy what it is that they're selling based on that ad? If it was, let's say, your game, or when, if you create something, an ad that you're using on Facebook, would you buy this product based on that ad? That is actually a great question to ask somebody that you trust, a close person that you trust. It's like, would you buy this based on that ad? Or would you click through? Would you want to know more? And the unspoken question is, what would need to change in order for you to, if you didn't, right? If you didn't want to know more. Yes.
Make your game
that.
not suck. No, I'm just kidding. It's all about the advertising. Advertising has been around forever. Marketing's been around forever, and the same rules still apply. I was laughing once because I saw an ad. I have it on my it's on my Facebook feed somewhere, but like it was like one of the like food stands in the mall had like this special drink, and it was called like something like Forever Summer Lemonade, but then it said in small print for a limited time. So I'm like, oh, so forever isn't forever. So I don't know if the limited time part was a marketing ploy to get it to, but yeah. So you want to make sure your marketing is like you said. Would you buy it, and make sure there's no conflict in your marketing that would cause confusion, where it can lead people to not want to buy your product.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing that he spoke about was audience sizes. So it's very important that when you are comparing audiences, that they have a similar size. If you're targeting, general board gamers, and it might not be a good idea to compare that with a more niched audience. Like, let's say we say general board gamers who also like fantasy games. That might be a little bit more niche. It's going to be a different demographic. It might be better to compare general board gamers who like fantasy games versus general board gamers who like sci-fi games, and compare those two. They'll have similar size audiences. So that's important when making intelligent decisions on how well your ads are working.
Right, and that's because so let's say, going back to the number of general board gamers that like Kickstarter, roughly 3.8 million people. If you add in collectible card games and Dungeons and Dragons, so like RPGs, you're going to get to a maximum of about 6.5 million people. Now, if you run an ad in that particular audience, you're going to get whatever results you're going to get. But the thing is, you're teaching Facebook. So Facebook is going to learn based on the campaign overall what type of customer is a really good fit for you, who, based on the results, right? So Facebook is going to try to give you more people that are going to sign up for your email list. If that's the result that you're telling Facebook, you're measuring success by that result. Facebook is going to try to do more of that. Now, to use an example, myself, Deliverance, we have one audience with like everyone. It's 6.5 million people, RPGs, board games, and Kickstarter, and collectible card games. And then we've got those people that are also Chronicles of Narnia fans. And that's pretty low. I mean, for whatever reason on Facebook, there are not that many people that are Chronicles of Narnia fans, that are also board gamers, that are also Kickstarter backers. It's about 180,000 people that are Chronicles of Narnia fans. Now, in the past, this Chronicles of Narnia fan, I ran like $5 a day. It was one of my most effective. It was a very small audience, but it was, for that $5, we earned leads for like less than $1. And it was very effective. Now, if I had that small little ad group or ad set right next to the big general board gamer ad set, Facebook would see 10 times as many people coming from the general board gamers as they did the Chronicles of Narnia people. So what would happen is you would be mixing your data together. Facebook would, in my particular case, it basically be completely influenced by the general board gamers, and the Chronicles of Narnia would not actually show Facebook any difference. If Chronicles of Narnia fans were by themselves, in their own campaign, Facebook would see, hey, it looks like Christian nerds like this Deliverance. But if I mixed them with the general board gamers, it would be like, hey, it looks like nerds like Deliverance, and it would never pick out that little Christian part, which is actually one of my highest, because my game is a religious themed board game. It is one of the things that make my most hardcore fans. So I would, in essence, by mixing the two audiences, be hiding that fact from Facebook.
When you first create a dynamic ad, you're not going to be able to see any metrics by default. What you have to do is, if you're in your ads manager, you have to, on the top right, there is this basically button that says breakdown with a little upside down arrow. And when you tap that, you will be able to select by dynamic creative element, and you'll be able to sort through image, video, and slideshow, website URL, text, headline, description, and call to action. And that's where you compare all those different metrics. It's through this sort of arcane menu, which isn't really there by default. So it's the top right, it's breakdown. You then scroll down to by dynamic creative element, and then you can select the thing that you want to compare, like the image or the text or the headline.
Does Facebook ads allow you to like do combinations? Like say like, oh, this headline and this image work the best together, or is it just image versus image, header versus header?
So it compares apples to apples, the headline against all the other headlines, the image against all the other images, the primary text against all the other primary text. But what Facebook is doing is with a dynamic ad, they are doing the testing. So they are comparing one ad to all the others, or I'm sorry, one headline with all the other images, with all the other primary text, and they're getting, a certain amount of impressions before they would consider that test complete, and then they'll do different combinations. So there would be, 5 times 5 times 5, 125 different combinations if you use 5 images, 5 headlines, and 5 primary text. So Facebook will do all of that with about $40 of investment. And so that's why earlier we talked about the click-through rate, the cost per click, and the cost per impressions, cost per 1,000 impressions. Those 3 columns, and of course in addition to your cost per result, those 3 columns, for maybe 4, are very, very important for you to review. And I would say, if you have enough data, so if you've spent enough time, spent like $5 trying to do this, and you get, it's just not going to be enough money spent in order to run through all those combinations. But if you've spent enough, as I said, roughly $40 on a dynamic ad, you should have enough information to say, okay, this is trustworthy.
So another thing Johnson said was that one of the most important parts of a Facebook ad is the primary text. This is the text above the image. He says they would spend more time, even more money, on mastering that primary text than any other element of the ad. He says, before they hire out, creative professionals, they actually hire out copy editors to make sure that the primary text is super engaging. So he suggested always starting your primary text with a question, and you want to have the question fill up the space so that when you get to that ... or see more, people are intrigued enough to click it and engage with the ad a bit longer. So that's something that I'm really interested in fleshing out as we move forward with our Kickstarter campaigns and with our ads.
Yeah, it's interesting because, historically we have avoided the dreaded ... So what happens in primary text, in the primary text field inside Facebook ads, you have as much text as much room as you want. But if you go past, roughly 3 lines in, really it's like 2 lines inside the primary text field, it will, so if let's say you write 5 lines of text, you're going to get, 3 lines to display, and then you'll see ... see more. If I wanted to read the rest, I could see more and then read the rest of what is written. The reason I originally thought that was a problem was, if people are scrolling down and scrolling through your stuff, they are going to stop and take a look, and if the important stuff is below the fold, or rather after you click that see more button, only then will the important stuff display. You're doing yourself a disservice, and they're not going to read all that stuff, right? So whatever ends up above that has to be the most important, the most attention grabbing, and so on and so forth. Now, that still rings true. However, with that primary text, and this actually proved to be correct with my dynamic ad, I did one version of primary text that was way, way longer than the others. And I tried to make it very interesting above the fold so that people would want to see more. It's like a tactical combat adventure board game about angels, demons, and the saints caught between. It's like, I want to know more about that. That was proven by the data that people do want to know more. So him challenging that preconceived notion that I had about primary text needing to be short, it's already paid dividends for me personally in ads, and of course moving forward with our clients. So I thought that was really cool. And then, like you said, Sean, asking a question here, I love questions. I love when people ask questions in ads. and it makes it like a very thematic question, you know. I remember we did Rurik Dawn of Kiev, or Rurik Stone and Blade, the expansion to Rurik Dawn of Kiev, and the most influential ads were the ones that asked questions, you know, all related to, can you ascend to the throne of Kievan Rus, or will you be left in the dust of history, or something like that.
And it makes sense because I suppose when someone sees an ad and if they click see more, now they're invested, right? It's too easy for them to read the primary text. Oh, I'm not interested, flick up. But if it's somewhat a little bit engaging, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to really stick on that ad a bit longer. And that's probably going to increase the likelihood of them clicking through because they've invested some time. If it's too easy just to swipe up, which it is, then the probability of them actually clicking the ad, engaging with the ad, will go down. So it's interesting. We've had a couple of clients who've had longer copy, and it's actually proven to be quite effective. So, and this is something that you can obviously work out with your dynamic ads. You can have one copy that's very long and one that's very short, and you'll be able to see which is performing better. But it would be worth noting that dynamic ads are not for the long game. They're not profitable. They're during your testing phase. So your first month of ads, you want to use dynamic ads to really hone down your copy, your image, and to really get those nice and niched. And then you probably want to reduce the dynamic ad spend. I would say even turn it off once you have ads that are really optimized. So they're not the most profitable, the most useful use of your budget. But what they do is they give you very valuable information in the cheapest way possible. Because if you were to do this with regular ads, it would take much longer. It would take much more money to get that same information.
In addition, there was something else that Johnson mentioned, which I had previously rejected, and that is video ads. I mean, number one, you always want to make sure that your ad looks like a post that you might just see in the newsfeed. You don't want to make it look like an ad. You know, whenever people ask me, "Hey, should we put the come into Kickstarter, or live on Kickstarter badge, something like that?" It always has historically lowered the value, or rather it's increased the cost per click, it's decreased the number of people who subscribe for the budget, and that's simply because people recognize that as an ad really quickly. It's like if you tell them, this is an ad for a Kickstarter game, then people are just going to scroll past, and that's just a subconscious thing that we don't like being advertised to. There's a reason that we don't actively look and read billboards anymore when we drive along the roads. Not to say they're not effective, but it wouldn't be effective for a board game Kickstarter, right? You want to make sure that your ads look like normal posts. And so Johnson suggested that we would use video ads just simply by recording with an iPhone. So, a 30-second or a 60-second video, 60 seconds max, because Instagram isn't going to play a video, or Story is not going to play a video longer than 60 seconds. But the idea is that if you just recorded a video saying, "Hi, my name's Andrew. I created this game called Deliverance. Let me show you." And then I open the box and show you what's inside or whatever, that tends to be more interesting. One of the things that people would always do is they would give us their Kickstarter video, and it would be like the hype video for the Kickstarter campaign, and it would be 3 minutes or whatever, and you can
Somewhere the deep recesses of the galaxy,
yeah,
there
exactly.
is a conflict of aliens and robots.
Yeah, and then I'm already lost, it's like, all right, I'm done, it's like it, it may be that I'll stick around, but usually what we find is that those the results for those things are terrible. And that's why we tell people, everyone makes a really cool hype video, and it does perform well on the Kickstarter page, does not perform well historically in a Facebook ad. And so I'm really interested in revisiting video ads and getting our clients to film one just on their own iPhone video. So that is pretty exciting.
The ultimate robot versus alien dance-off competition. No,
Yeah.
I actually tried video ads, and maybe I have the advantage of actually having a bit of a background in motion graphics. So I was able to animate basically a still image, make it a little bit engaging. And I've actually, through using dynamic through a personal project of mine, and testing the things that we had learned from Johnson, I was able to determine that a video ad actually got me a better cost per click and a better conversion rate. So I've turned off my image ads and I'm now running on video ads. And that could be for several reasons. It could be simply because there's less people on Facebook using video ads, so it's therefore less competitive. Something that you do want to experiment with. And maybe this always comes, this is probably worth mentioning as well, is that no matter what you're doing, you always need a lab. Like Andrew said, he has Deliverance. He's testing things on Deliverance. I'm testing things myself on my own, personal things, non-work related. But everyone needs a lab, and you need a space where you are free to experiment and to try things without there being, massive, failures or consequences for that. And that's really going to help you learn and apply these things. And that way it helps you. You can say, hey, I've tried this, I've tested this, and I know it works because I did it in my own lab. So I think it's always a good idea to have some type of personal project. And really, your first Kickstarter is that. You're going to learn so much from your first Kickstarter. By the time you get to your second Kickstarter, you'll be able to bring all that knowledge with you to really excel your next project. And that just keeps on building on top of itself.
That is all the time we have left for Crowdfunding Nerds podcast. For some great articles, resources, and to listen to our previous podcasts, visit our website at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a question for us, feel free to go to crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if it's a really awesome question, we will put it in a future podcast. And again, thank you to big shout out to is it Mr. the Invisible Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson. Yes. For his awesome feedback for doing Facebook ads. And
absolutely. We're going to try to get him on this podcast for sure. If he'll have us.
Yes. You might have just scared him off.
I know.
No more Mr. Johnson. Sorry. And that's all we got, nerds. Have a great week. We'll see you soon, and stay nerdy.